Many years ago, there lived an emperor who thought so much of new clothes that he spent all his money in order that he might be very fine. He didn't care for his soldiers, nor for going to the play, or driving in the park, except to show his new clothes. He had a coat for every hour of the day, and just as they say of a king, he is in the council room, so they always said of him, the emperor is in his dressing room. The great city where he lived was very gay, and every day many strangers came there. One day there came 2 swindlers. They said that they were weavers, and said they could weave the finest cloth to be imagined. Their colors and patterns, they said, were not only exceptionally beautiful, but the clothes made of their material possessed the wonderful quality of being invisible to any man who was unfit for his office or hopelessly stupid. "Those must be wonderful clothes," said the emperor. "If I wore such clothes, I should be able to find out which men in my empire were unfit for their places, and I could tell the clever from the stupid. Yes, I must have this cloth woven for me without delay." And he gave a lot of money to the 2 swindlers in advance, so that they should set to work at once. They set up 2 looms and pretended to be very hard at work, but they had nothing whatever on the looms. They asked for the finest silk and the most precious gold. This they put in their own bags, and worked at the empty looms till late into the night. "I should very much like to know how they are getting on with the cloth," thought the emperor. But he felt rather uneasy when he remembered that he who was not fit for his office could not see it. He believed, of course, that he had nothing to fear for himself. Yet he thought he would send somebody else first to see how matters stood. Everybody in the town knew what a wonderful property the stuff possessed, and all were anxious to see how bad or stupid their neighbors were. "I will send my honest old minister to the weavers," thought the emperor. "He can judge best how the stuff looks, for he is intelligent, and nobody understands his office better than he." So the good old minister went into the room where the 2 swindlers sat working at the empty looms. "Heaven preserve us," he thought, and opened his eyes wide. "I cannot see anything at all." But he did not say so. Both swindlers told him to come near and asked him if he did not admire the exquisite pattern and the beautiful colors. They pointed to the empty looms, and the poor old minister opened his eyes wider. But he could see nothing, for there was nothing to be seen. "Gracious," he thought, "can I be so stupid? I should never have thought so, and nobody must know it. Is it possible that I am not fit for my office? No, I cannot say that I was unable to see the cloth." "Well, have you got nothing to say?" said one as he wove. "Oh, it is very pretty, quite enchanting," said the old minister, peering through his spectacles. What a pattern, and what colors! I shall tell the emperor that I am very much pleased with it." "Well, we are glad of that," said both the weavers, and they named the colors and explained the curious pattern to him. The old minister listened attentively, that he might relate to the emperor what they said, and he did so. Again the swindlers asked for more money, more silk and gold, which they required for weaving. They kept it all for themselves, and not a thread came near the loom, but they continued, as hitherto, to work at the empty looms. Soon afterwards, the emperor sent another courtier to the weavers to see how they were getting on, and if the cloth was nearly finished. Like the old minister, he looked and looked, but could see nothing. as there was nothing to be seen. "Is it not a beautiful piece of cloth?" said the two swindlers, showing and explaining the magnificent pattern which, however, was not there at all. "I am not stupid," thought the man. "Is it therefore my good appointment for which I am not fit? It is ludicrous, but I must not let anyone know it." And he praised the cloth, which he did not see, and expressed his pleasure at the beautiful colors and the fine pattern. "Yes, it is quite enchanting," said he to the emperor. Everybody in the whole town was talking about the splendid cloth. At last, the emperor wished to see it himself while it was still on the loom. With a whole company of chosen men, including the two honest counselors who had already been there, he went to the two clever swindlers, who were now weaving as hard as they could, but without using any thread. "Is it not magnifique?" said both the honest statesmen. "Will your majesty see what a pattern and what colors?" And they pointed to the empty looms, for they imagined the others could see the cloth. "What is this?" thought the emperor. "I do not see anything at all. This is terrible. Am I stupid? Am I unfit to be emperor? That would indeed be the most dreadful thing that could happen to me. Yes, it is very fine," said the emperor. "It has our highest approval." And, nodding contentedly, he gazed at the empty loom, for he did not like to say that he could see nothing. All his attendants who were with him looked and looked, and although they could not see anything more than the others, they said, like the emperor, "It is very fine," and all advised him to wear the new magnificent clothes at a great procession which was soon to take place. "It is magnifique, beautiful, excellent," went from mouth to mouth, and everybody seemed delighted. The emperor gave each of the swindlers the cross of the Order of Knighthood and the title of Imperial Court Weavers. All through the night before the procession was due to take place, the swindlers were up and had more than 16 candles burning. People could see that they were busy getting the emperor's new clothes ready. They pretended to take the cloth from the loom. They snipped the air with big scissors. They sewed with needles without thread, and said at last, "Now the emperor's new clothes are ready." The emperor, with all his noblest courtiers, then came in, and both the swindlers held up one arm as if they held something and said, "See, here are the trousers. Here is the coat. Here is the cloak," and so on. "They are all as light as a cobweb. They make one feel as if one had nothing on at all, but that is just the beauty of it." "Yes," said all the courtiers, but they could not see anything, for there was nothing to be seen. "Will it please your majesty graciously to take off your clothes?" said the swindlers. "Then we may help your majesty into the new clothes before the large looking-glass." The emperor took off all his clothes, and the swindlers pretended to put the new clothes upon him, one piece after another, and the emperor looked at himself in the glass from every side. "Oh, how well they look! How well they fit!" said all. "What a pattern! What colors! That is a splendid dress." "They are waiting outside with the canopy, which is to be borne over your majesty in the procession," said the chief master of the ceremonies. "Yes, I am quite ready," said the emperor. "Does not my suit fit me marvelously?" And he turned once more to the looking-glass, that people should think he admired his garments. The chamberlains, who were to carry the train, fumbled with their hands on the ground as if they were lifting up a train. Then they pretended to hold something up in their hands. They dare not let people know that they could not see anything. And so the emperor marched in the procession under the beautiful canopy, and all who saw him in the street and out of the windows exclaimed, "How marvelous the emperor's new suit is! What a long train it has! How well it fits him!" Nobody would let others know that he saw nothing, for then he would have been unfit for his office or too stupid. None of the emperor's clothes had ever been such a success.
"But he has nothing on at all,"
said a little child. "Good heavens! Hear what the little innocent says," said the father, and then each whispered to the other what the child said.
"He has nothing on. A little child says he has nothing on at all."
"He has nothing on at all," cried all the people at last. And the emperor, too, was feeling very worried, for it seemed to him that they were right. But he thought to himself, "All the same, I must keep the procession going now." And he held himself stiffer than ever, and the chamberlains walked on and held up the train, which was not there at all. It was so terribly cold. It snowed and snowed, and it was almost dark. It was also the last evening of the year, New Year's Eve. In the cold and darkness, a poor little girl with bare head and naked feet went along the streets. When she left home, it is true, she had had slippers on, but what was the use of that? They were very large slippers. Her mother had worn them till then. They were so big. And the little girl lost them as she hurried across the street to get out of the way of two carts driving furiously along. One slipper was not to be found again, and a boy had caught up the other and run away with it. He said he could use it for a cradle when he had children of his own. So the little girl had to go walking about in her little bare feet, which were red and blue with cold. She carried a lot of matches in an old apron and a box of them in her hand. No one had bought any from her the whole day. No one had given her a halfpenny. Hungry and shivering, she went along, poor little thing, a picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long yellow hair that curled so prettily on her neck, but she did not think of that now. Lights were shining in all the windows, and there was a tempting smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she was thinking of that. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected a little beyond the other, she sat down and huddled herself together. She had tucked her little feet under her, but she felt colder and colder. She dared not go home, for she had not sold any matches, nor earned a single halfpenny. Her father would beat her, and it was cold at home, too. They had only the roof above them, through which the wind whistled, although the largest cracks had been stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost dead with cold. One little match might do her good. If she dared take only one out of the box, strike it on the wall, and warm her fingers, she took one out. Oh, how it sputtered and burned! It was a warm, bright flame like a little candle when she held her hands over it. It was a wonderful little light, and it really seemed to the child as though she was sitting in front of a great iron stove with polished brass feet and brass ornaments. How the fire burned up, and how it warmed. But what was that? The little girl was already stretching out her feet to warm these two when out went the little flame. The stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the burned match in her hand. She struck a second one on the wall. It burned and gave a light, and where this fell upon the wall, it became transparent, like a veil. She could see right into the room. A white tablecloth was spread upon the table, which was decked with shining china dishes, and there was a lovely smell of roast goose stuffed with apples and prunes. And what pleased the poor little girl more than all was that the goose hopped down from the dish and came waddling across the floor straight towards her. Just at that moment, out went the match, and only the thick, cold wall was to be seen. So she lighted another match, and there she was, sitting under the beautiful Christmas tree. It was much larger and more decorated than the one she had seen through the glass doors at the rich merchants'. The green boughs were lit up with thousands of candles and gaily painted figures like those in the shop windows. The little girl stretched her hands out towards them, and out went the match. She could hardly wait till she lit another match, and she did. The Christmas candles rose higher and higher till they were the only stars in the sky. One of them fell, leaving a long, fiery trail behind it.
Now someone is going to heaven,
said the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only person who had ever been good to her and who had now passed on, had said that when a star falls, a soul goes up to heaven. She struck another match on the wall. It was alight at once, and in its glow stood her old grandmother, so dazzling and bright and so kind and loving.
Grandmother,
cried the little girl.
oh, take me with you. I know that you will go away when the match is burned out. You will vanish like the warm stove, like the beautiful roast goose and the big splendid Christmas tree.
And she quickly lighted the whole box of matches, for she did not wish to let her grandmother go. The matches burned with such a blaze that it was lighter than day, and the old grandmother had never appeared so beautiful or so tall before. Taking the little girl in her arms, she flew up with her in brightness and joy, high, so high, and there was no cold, nor hunger, nor sorrow, for they were in heaven. But in the corner by the houses, in the cold dawn, the little girl was still sitting with red cheeks and a smile upon her lips. The New Year's sun shone upon her brightly as the child sat stiffly holding her matches, of which a box had been burned. She must have tried to warm herself, someone said. No one knew what beautiful things she had seen, nor into what glory she had entered with her grandmother on the joyous New Year. There were once 25 tin soldiers who were all brothers, as they were cast from an old tin spoon. They all carried their guns on their shoulders and looked straight forward, and they all had the same smart uniform, red and blue. The first words which they heard upon seeing the light of day, when the lid was taken off the box in which they were packed, were, "Tin soldiers!" These words were uttered by a little boy who had received them as a birthday present, and clapped his hands for joy. He then put them in rank and file on the table. One soldier looked exactly like another, only one, who had been cast last of all, when there was not enough tin left, was not like his brothers, for he had only one leg. Nevertheless, he stood just as firmly on his one leg as the others on two, and he was the very one who became famous. On the table where they were placed were many other toys, But what caught the eye most of all was a pretty castle of paper. Through its little windows one could look into the rooms. Before the castle stood little trees round a clear lake, which was made by a little looking-glass. Swans, made of wax, were swimming on it and were reflected in it. All this was very pretty, but the prettiest of all was a little lady who stood in the open door of the castle. She was cut out of paper, but she had on a frock of the whitest muslin, and a piece of narrow blue ribbon was fixed on her shoulders like a scarf, and on it was fixed a glittering tinsel rose as large as her whole face. The little lady stretched out both arms, for she was a dancer, and when she lifted one leg high up so that the tin soldier could not see it, he thought she had only one leg, like himself. "That's the wife for me," he thought, "but she is very grand. She lives in a castle, while I have only a box which I share with 4 That is no place for her. But I must meet her." And then he laid himself at full length behind a snuff-box which was on the table. From there he could see the dainty little lady who continued to stand on one leg without losing her balance. At night, all the other tin soldiers were put back into their box, and the people of the house went to bed. Now the toys began to play, to pay visits, to make war, and to go to balls. The tin soldiers rattled in their box, for they wished to take part in the games, but they could not raise the lid. The nutcrackers turned somersaults. The slate pencil amused itself on the slate. They made so much noise that the canary woke up and began to talk, and even in verse. The tin soldier and the dancer were the only ones who remained in their places. She was standing on tiptoe with her arms stretched out. He stood firmly on his one leg, never taking his eyes away from her for a moment. When the clock struck 12, suddenly the lid of the snuff-box flew open. There was no snuff in it, but a small black troll, a jack-in-the-box.
"Tin soldier," said the jack-in-the-box, "will you keep your eyes to yourself?"
The tin soldier pretended not to hear it.
"All right, wait till tomorrow," said the jack-in-the-box.
When morning came and the children were up, the tin soldier was placed on the windowsill. All at once, whether it was the jack-in-the-box or the draught, the window flew open and the soldier fell headlong down into the street from the 3rd story. It was a terrible fall. With his one leg in the air, he stood on his helmet, while his bayonet stuck in the ground between the paving stones. The servant and the little boy came down at once to look for him, but although they were so close that they almost trod upon him, they didn't see him. If the tin soldier had cried out, "Here I am," they would surely have found him, but he did not consider it proper to call out aloud because he was in uniform. Then it began to rain, first very little, but soon more, till it became a heavy shower. When the rain had ceased, 2 street boys came by.
"Look, there is a tin soldier," said one of them. "Let's give him a sail."
So they made a boat out of a piece of newspaper, put the tin soldier in it, and let him float down the gutter. Both the boys ran by the side and clapped their hands. What waves there were in the gutter, and such a strong current, too, for the rain had been pouring down in torrents. The paper boat rocked up and down. Sometimes it turned round so quickly that the tin soldier trembled, but he remained firm. He didn't move a muscle and looked straight forward, holding his gun on his shoulder. All at once, the boat was driven into a long drain, and there it became as dark as it had been in his box. "Where am I going?" he thought. "This is the fault of the black troll. Oh, if only the little lady sat here with me in the boat, then I shouldn't mind the darkness." Then there came a big water rat which lived in the drain.
"Have you got a pash?"
asked the rat.
"Give me your pash."
But the tin soldier kept silent and held his gun tighter than before. The boat rushed on. The rat followed, gnashing its teeth and crying out to the chips of wood and straws,
"Stop him! Stop him! He has not paid the toll. He has not shown his pass."
The current became stronger and stronger. The tin soldier could already see the light of day where the drain ended, but he also heard a roaring noise strong enough to frighten a brave man. Where the drain ended, the water rushed into a big canal. He was so close to it that to stop was impossible. The boat dashed on. The poor tin soldier held himself as stiff as he could. Nobody could say of him that he had blinked an eye. The boat rapidly whirled round 3 or 4 times and was filled with water to the very brim. It must sink. The tin soldier stood up to his neck in water. Deeper and deeper sank the boat. More and more soaked became the paper. Then the water closed over the soldier's head. He thought of the sweet little dancer whom he should never see again, and there sounded in his ear,
"Farewell, soldier, true and brave. Nothing now thy life can save."
Then the paper boat fell to pieces, and the tin soldier, sinking into the water, was snapped up by a big fish. It was very dark indeed inside the fish, much darker than in the drain, and it was awfully narrow, too. But the tin soldier remained firm and lay down full length, holding his gun firmly on his shoulder. The fish rushed about and made the most extraordinary movements. At last, it became quiet. It seemed as if a flash of lightning passed through it. The broad daylight appeared, and a voice shouted, "The tin soldier!" The fish had been caught and taken to market. There it had been sold and brought to the kitchen, where the cook had just cut it open with a big knife. With 2 fingers she took the tin soldier round the middle and carried him upstairs to show everybody the wonderful man who had been traveling about in a fish's stomach. They put him on the table, and there, what strange things happen in this world. He was in the self-same room where he had been before. He saw the same children, and the same toys were on the table. There was also the pretty castle with the dear little dancer. She stood still on one leg and held the other high up in the air. She, too, was steadfast. The tin soldier was very much touched, and he nearly shed tin tears, but that was not becoming for a soldier. He looked at her, but said nothing. Suddenly, one of the little boys took up the tin soldier and threw him into the stove without giving any reason for this strange conduct. Again, it must have been the fault of the black troll in the snuff box. The tin soldier stood there in the strong light and felt an unbearable heat, but whether this heat was caused by the real fire or by love, he did not know. His color vanished, but nobody could say if that happened during his journey or if grief was the cause of it. He looked at the little lady, and she looked at him, and he felt that he was melting. But still, he stood upright with his gun in his arm. All at once, a door flew open. The wind took the dancer, and she flew like a sylph into the stove to the tin soldier, blazed up, and was gone in a moment. The tin soldier melted down into a lump, and when the servant cleared out the cinders next morning, she found him in the shape of a little tin heart. Of the little dancer, only the tinsel rose was left, and that was burned as black as coal. Have you ever seen a really old cupboard, quite black with age and carved with foliage and scrolls? Just such a one stood in a parlor. It was a legacy from great-grandmother and was covered from top to bottom with carved roses and tulips. There were the quaintest carvings on it, and among these were little stags' heads with antlers. In the middle of the cupboard, an entire figure of a man had been carved. He was certainly ridiculous to look at, and he grinned, for you could not call it laughing. He had a goat's legs, little horns on his head, and a long beard. The children in the room always called him the Over and Under General War Commander Sergeant Billy Goatlegs. That was a difficult name to pronounce, and there are not many who get this title, but to have carved him, that was something, and there he was. He was always looking at the table under the looking-glass, for on this table stood a pretty little shepherdess made of porcelain. Her shoes were gilt, her dress was adorned with a red rose, and besides this she had a golden hat and a shepherd's crook. She was lovely. Close by her stood a little chimney sweep, as black as coal and also made of porcelain. He was as clean and neat as anybody, for, as to his being a chimney sweep, that was only what he was made to represent. The porcelain makers might just as well have made a prince of him if they had wanted to. There he stood with his ladder quite close to the shepherdess. They had both been placed there and had become engaged to each other, for they suited each other well. Both were young people. They were made of the same porcelain and were equally fragile. Close to them stood another figure, 3 times as large as they were. This was an old Chinaman who could nod. He was also made of porcelain, and said that he was the grandfather of the little shepherdess, but this could not be proved. He declared he had authority over her, and that therefore he had nodded to Over and Under General War Commander Sergeant Billy Goatlegs, who was wooing the little shepherdess.
"I will get you a husband," said the old Chinaman, "a husband who I verily believe is made of mahogany. He can make you Mrs. Over and Under General War Commander Sergeant Billy Goatlegs. He has a whole cupboard full of silver plate, which he keeps hidden in secret drawers."
"I won't go into the dark cupboard," said the little shepherdess. "I have heard tell that he has 11 porcelain wives in there."
"Then you may become 12th," said the Chinaman. "This night you shall be married, as sure as I am an old Chinaman."
And with that he nodded his head and fell asleep. But the little shepherdess cried and looked at her heart's beloved, the porcelain chimney sweep.
"I beg of you to go with me out into the wide world, for we can't stay here."
"I will do whatever you wish," said the little chimney sweep.
"Let us start directly. I think I can make a living by exercising my profession." "If we were only safely down from the table," said she, "I shall not be happy until we're out in the wide world."
And he tried to comfort her, and showed her how she must set her little foot upon the carved border and the gilded foliage on the leg of the table. He brought his ladder, too, to help her, and they were soon together upon the floor. But when they looked up at the old cupboard, there was a great stir there. All the carved stags were stretching out their heads, rearing up their antlers, and turning their necks. And the Over and Under General War Commander Sergeant Billy Goatlegs sprang high in the air and shouted across to the old Chinaman,
"Now they're running away! Now they're running away!"
At that they were frightened and jumped quickly into the deck of cards and a little doll's theater where a comedy was being acted. All the queens of diamonds and hearts, clubs and spades sat in the first row, fanning themselves with their tulips, and behind them stood all the knaves, showing that they had a head both above and below, as is usual in playing cards. The comedy was about 2 people who could not marry each other, and the shepherdess cried, because it was just like her own story.
"I cannot bear it," said she. "I must get out of the drawer."
But when they got down on the floor and looked up at the table, the old Chinaman was awake and was rocking his whole body.
"Here comes the old Chinaman,"
cried the little shepherdess, and she fell down on her porcelain knees, so frightened was she.
"I have an idea," said the chimney sweep. "Shall we creep into the great potpourri vase which stands in the corner? There we can lie on roses and lavender and throw salt in his eyes when he comes."
"That will be no use," said she. "Besides, I know that the old Chinaman and the potpourri vase were once engaged to each other, and a kind of liking always remains when people have once been on such terms. No, there's nothing left for us but to go out into the wide world."
"Have you really courage to go out into the wide world with me?" asked the chimney sweep. "Have you thought how big it is, and that we can never come back here again?"
"Yes, I have,"
replied she. And the chimney sweep looked fixedly at her and said,
"My way lies up the chimney. Have you really courage to creep with me through the stove, through the iron firebox, as well as up the flue pipe? Then we can get out into the chimney, and I know how to find my way there. We'll climb so high that they can't catch us, and at the very top there's a hole that leads out into the wide world."
And he led her to the door of the stove.
"It looks very black there,"
said she. But still she went with him, through the box and through the pipe, where it was pitch dark night.
"Now we're in the chimney," said he. "And look, up there a beautiful star is shining."
And it was a real star in the sky, which shone straight down upon them, as if it would show them the way. And they crawled and they crept. It was a frightful way, and terribly steep, but he supported her and helped her up. He held her and showed her the best places to place her porcelain feet. And so they reached the top of the chimney, and upon that they sat down, for they were desperately tired, as they well might be. The sky with all its stars was high above. They could see all the rooftops of the town below them. They could see far around them, far out into the world. The poor shepherdess had never thought it would be like this. She leaned her little head against the chimney sweep, and she wept so bitterly that all the guilt was washed off her.
"This is too much," she said. "I can't bear it. The world is too big. If I were only back on the little table under the looking glass, I shall never be happy until I am there again. I've followed you out into the wide world, and now you may follow me back home again, if you really love me."
And the chimney sweep spoke sensibly to her, spoke of the old Chinaman, and of Over and Under General War Commander Sergeant Billy Goatlegs. But she kissed her little chimney sweep and sobbed so bitterly that he could not help giving way to her, though it was foolish. And so, with much difficulty, they climbed down the chimney again, and they crept through the pipe and the firebox. This was not pleasant at all, and at last they stood in the dark stove again. There they listened behind the door to find out what was going on in the room. There it was quite still. They peeped out. There lay the old Chinaman in the middle of the floor. He had fallen down from the table as he was pursuing them, and now he lay broken into 3 pieces. His back had come off all in one piece, and his head had rolled into a corner. The Over and Under General War Commander Sergeant Billy Goatlegs stood there where he had always stood, and meditated.
"This is terrible," said the little shepherdess. "The old grandfather has fallen to pieces, and it's our fault. I shall never survive it."
"He can be mended," said the chimney sweep. "He can easily be mended. Don't be so hasty. If they cement his back together and give him a good rivet in his neck, he'll be as good as new, and may say many a disagreeable word to us yet."
"Do you think so?"
said she. So they climbed back upon the table where they used to stand.
"You see, this is as far as we have got," said the chimney sweep. "We might well have spared ourselves all our troubles."
"If only old grandfather could be riveted," said the shepherdess. "I wonder if that costs very much."
And mended he was. The family had his back cemented and a good rivet put in his neck, and he was as good as new, only he could no longer nod.
"It seems you have become proud since you were broken to pieces,"
said the Over and Under General War Commander Sergeant Billy Goatlegs.
"I don't think there's so much to be proud of. Am I to have her, or am I not?"
And the chimney sweep and the little shepherdess looked at the old Chinaman quite piteously, for they were afraid he might nod. But he could not do that, and it was irksome to him to tell a stranger that he always had a rivet in his neck. And so the little porcelain people remained together and loved one another until they broke to pieces.